Disillusion.
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 Apathy.
Apathy. Apathy. Apathy.
The Rona.
Hey guys, how are you doing? Well, if you kept up with the news recently, you can probably tell that things aren't great. Turns out everyone is having a moment. We can't really do what we usually do anymore because anything like me, you're probably very tired by now. And honestly, who wouldn't be? And it's not like politics is any better. Have you seen the news? That politician that you like lost. And the politician you don't like actually won. What's even the point of democracy? If I don't win, why do I care? The answer is, you don't. You know, it's quite difficult being a YouTuber in these times. I mean, sure, I already work from home and I don't actually have to do anything. And yet it is difficult, I feel, to actually become motivated to produce content because, well, the world is kind of falling apart. So you just end up sitting and staring into your computer, reading Twitter all day long, forever and ever, until the sadness takes over and you go back to bed. I generally think that one of the hardest things to do is care. I mean, sure, you can care about other people as a sort of empathy, but, you know, you also need to care enough to do something about it. That can mean many different things. You need to take care of yourself. Sometimes you need to take care of other people, even if you don't actually care about them. In these troubled times, I think it can be easy to think that everyone really cares. Is everyone doing their part? Is everyone quarantining? Good. That means you care. But we desperately need to talk about people who don't care anymore. Right now, when we're all locked up in quarantine and can't go outside, except for me because I live in Sweden and we don't care, because I guess we can just beat it using Viking energy or something like that. But because we're all inside quarantining, a lot of people are discussing feelings of boredom. People are bored. People don't want to be locked up inside forever. People want to go outside. People want to do their roots. People want to party, I guess. The risk is that if we stay inside too long, we will become depressed, apathetic almost, lose interest in the world around us because we aren't allowed to be part of it anymore. And it's very good that we're talking about apathy. Apathy is the lack of interest or lack of care, and that's a pretty bad thing to be. Obviously, we're mostly apathetic about everything. I, for instance, don't really care about Formula 1 racing, for example. I'm pretty apathetic about that, and that's fine. But there are always things that we try to care about, and we should at least try to care about things that matter, obviously. I can't really be apathetic about my next rent payment, because if I am, I'm just kind of screwed. In short, it would be damaging for me to be apathetic about certain subjects. It wouldn't be good for me, and it wouldn't be good for people that rely on me. We do all live in a society, and that means that we have responsibilities to other people as well, not just to ourselves. And to fight apathy, we often need to take precautions. We have therapists. We go outside to have fun. Fun. The outside world is fun. Outside world is fun.
Apathy. Apathy.
Disillusion.
Disillusion. Disillusion. Disillusion. Disillusion.
Becoming disillusioned is something that I often feel is overlooked in the discourse. And I feel like it is to the discourse detriment. When people have progressive opinions, everyone just sort of expects everyone else to have those opinions too, and don't really talk about why people stop being progressive sometimes. Or at least why people may remain progressive, but might not put in the work anymore. If you don't put your money where your mouth is, you're a traitor. Or as more commonly known in our sphere, a grifter. which makes sense. The good ideology is obviously the most correct one, and if you don't subscribe to that ideology, you're wrong. That's basically it. But the reality is that the world is complicated, and there are a lot of roadblocks ahead of what we want to do or feel. In an ideal world, everyone who could would come together and kind of decide how the world should look like. And you would hope, at least, that they could do it in a very fair manner. Ostensibly, that is what democracy is supposed to be like.
We need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem, agree what's in the best interest of all the people, and then do it.
That's exactly what we do. The trouble is that people don't always agree.
And yet, the world is not perfect. Why, though? I thought history has ended. This is very simplified and kind of what historian Francis Fukuyama meant when he said that we have reached the end of history. That liberal democracies have become permeated throughout the world, and that eventually all of the world will become like this. Wait, okay, hold on. When I was making the video, I thought that Francis Fukuyama was a historian, but apparently he's not even a historian, he's like a political scientist. Like, why would you write a book called The End of History if you're not even a historian? Like, what are you even doing? Okay, like, back to the actual video. There will no longer be large-scale social movements except for liberal democracy. And the idea was that liberal democracies would eventually lead to the most good for most people, which would be the most stable and secure system, leading to... which is... Woo! So what's up? Why hasn't this happened? Well, partially it's because everyone has different ideas about how this should work. What democracy is also very different depending on who you ask. Should everyone be allowed to vote? If there's one thing I've learned about being on YouTube, it is that the only people who should not be allowed to vote are influencers. We're trash people, we don't deserve rights. I deserve rights. But I'm on thin fucking ice. But all of this means that the world is very complicated, and those things can lead to political apathy and disillusion. Disillusion means that something isn't quite as good as you thought that it was going to be like. Let's say, for example, that you were hoping for a politician that you like to become the next president of the country that you are in. But it turns out that because of party politics, that candidate can't really be the option anymore. And instead, there will be another candidate who is less good, but, you know, ostensibly, in theory, better than the current administration. And maybe you could feel like, I mean, okay, this isn't as good as I was hoping, but it's better than the alternative, so guess I have to do this. Or you can become disillusioned and be like, well, what's even the point of democracy if my vote barely matters because of party politics or because of electoral maps? And this can lead many people to lose faith, not just in the new political candidate that they might not like, but in the entire system that they have previously partaken in. This might lead them to not take part the next year, which is problematic. I remember when I was in university and I joined a local feminist organization, which was very good, very feminist, very woke, and I would frequent some of their public seminars and lectures, and I was a dedicated member. I was supposed to start up one of the feminist podcasts that the organization wanted to do. But during the preparation of this podcast, I started overhearing some attitudes. And to preface this, you should know that I am a trans woman. As I was attending a lecture on transgender health, I started overhearing people in the very woke, very vegan, very SJW cafe that they had set up just outside. And I overheard them complaining to each other about the attendance of male bodies in a female-bodied space. And as I picked this up, I became more attentive to things I started overhearing in the more larger meetings, where people wouldn't really notice that I was attending. And I started hearing these gender-critical viewpoints being more and more pronounced than I previously thought, which kind of just made me pretty bummed out. Like, I didn't want to partake in that, and I didn't want to make it seem like I was endorsing those viewpoints by being part of the same organization as they were. But at the same time, the aims and goals of the organization overall didn't really represent those gender-critical viewpoints. The organization was still very woke, very feminist, very woman, and so I ended up at a crossroads. Did I want to stay with the organization and potentially make it better, or leave? Because staying was kind of making me a bit miserable, partly because I kept overhearing these things, but primarily because I didn't really know who to trust anymore. The people that I had been working alongside were also the same people that I could sometimes overhear being, let's say, a bit yikes in their opinions of trans people. But they acted friendly to me. I was never the direct target of harassment, so I shouldn't mind, right? And that eventually became like a whole thing. And I just left the organization, the podcast never happened, and it turns out that I just didn't want to join any real student activist organization anymore. And instead, I just went to a student bar and started drinking. To be honest, a much more fun activity. What had happened was that I had become disillusioned to the entire idea of feminist organizing. And to be honest, even today, the opinions and viewpoints of a lot of gender-critical feminists have kind of made me hesitant to even call myself a feminist still today. I mean, I am still a feminist, I still hold feminist viewpoints, but I don't really want to call myself a feminist because there's been so many interactions with feminists whose only real ideology has been against me. And by removing myself from that situation, I personally also felt better. Focusing on my own mental health and energy also meant leaving that organization. My apathy with student organization was therefore a little bit selfish, but you can understand where it came from. But at the same time, an organization that was ostensibly very good lost a member, a very enthusiastic member at that. And losing membership also makes the organization less efficient and less capable of doing what it is supposed to be doing. And so my disillusion with it, which came from a sensible place, and my decision to leave the organization, which came from a personally healthy place, did not really help anyone.
Apathy. Disillusion. Disillusion.
Disillusion.
Apathy. Disillusion. Disillusion. Apathy.
Whenever I watch American elections, I am always struck by how weird they are. In Sweden, at least, when I go vote, I can just go and vote. There's never a line, and attendance is usually pretty high. But whenever I watch American elections, I see these hour-long lines, and leading to places where they don't really do paper ballots either. Instead, a lot of polling places seem to be manned by voting machines, which would ostensibly be better, but are also just infinitely worse in terms of safety and democracy. If you want to hear why, there's a wonderful video by Tom Scott talking about why electronic voting is just the worst idea. And I see a lot of people talk about voter suppression, where there are more and more requirements to actually go vote, voter rolls being cleansed, as well as polling places shutting down all over areas that could potentially help the opposition party. And I see this happening with both Democrats and Republicans. So it's not just a Republican bad issue, it's just American democracy problem. So it's not unsurprising to hear that voter turnout in a lot of elections are not great. In the midterm elections of 2014 in America, only about a third of the electorate actually voted, which means that even amongst the people who can vote, which is itself a subsection of the total population, almost no one decided who was actually being voted into office, and pretty significant offices at that. And there's rightful anger talking about voter suppression and other forms of reasons why people can't vote. But it doesn't explain the people that won't vote, even though they aren't connected. Let's say that you're an American voter voting for the first time in a midterm election. First of all, the election isn't really seen as equally important to the presidential elections. so maybe you don't really care that much. The presidential election is where all the hype is, and maybe you don't really care that much about what goes on in your specific congressional district. Let's say you do. First of all, there's already way less media discussing your election, because media has to focus on all sorts of elections. So maybe you're not even getting the information that you're supposed to be getting in the first place. Second of all, you might be part of a gerrymandered district, which means that it might be a safe seat for one of the political parties. And you might not belong to that political party, and therefore you might feel that your vote doesn't really count. And unfortunately, under the American democratic system, you're right, it really doesn't. Furthermore, let's say that there has been a bunch of problems recently in your district regarding voter rolls, voter suppression, and also the electronic voting machines, half of which barely work anyway, and they keep having these like weird errors that doesn't really work. And you go and try this, and you do all of this, and you're standing in the voting line, and you might just feel, what's the point? You know, like, what's the point? Why am I standing in a line for a vote that maybe won't even matter, to vote in a machine that maybe won't even register my vote properly, and for a party that basically has no chance winning here anyway? I might as well go home. And the problem is, this is also how voter suppression works. It doesn't just work by making people ineligible to vote. It also works by making people unwilling to go through the effort of voting. And this might mean that even though you do live in a safe seat, maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe more people would actually vote for your party if everyone in your district actually went out to vote. But because not everyone turns out, maybe that doesn't happen. It also applies to people who just don't really care about politics. And I know, we are part of the discourse, and that means that obviously we care about politics. Everything is politics when you really think about it. Everything's a prison when you really think about it. Doing philosophy is easy as hell. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who just don't care. And I've been part of this myself. The first time I ever voted, I didn't really care. I didn't even know really much about politics, but all of my friends were voting for the Social Democrats, so I felt like, well, I should do that too. But I hadn't kept up with any of the campaigning, I hadn't heard a single politician speak, I hadn't donated money, I hadn't been knocking doors, I hadn't done nothing. But I still voted, but I can see why a lot of people just wouldn't. And some people would even see that as a responsible choice. They haven't cared enough to actually become informed, or maybe they haven't had the opportunity to become informed, and so they might feel that putting a vote to any candidate would be a mistake. But okay, most of the things that I've talked about can theoretically be fixed by reducing voter suppression, having proper paper ballots, and having a more fair system of elections, reducing gerrymandering and corruption and so forth. Yeah, okay. But the problem with all of this is that low voter turnout also encourages these types of behaviors. If your political party won because of gerrymandering, they will probably want to keep gerrymandering. And because they won because of gerrymandering, they also have the power to do so. And so there's a cycle, which in turn leads to even lower turnout amongst the demographics that you want to exclude, which just tightens your hold in power, which just makes voter suppression even worse. It's voter suppression all the way down. But theoretically, if you just remove these options, you could fix it. The real danger, though, is when you don't, and it leads to something even worse. Political alienation.
Apathy.
Apathy. Apathy.
Disillusion.
Disillusion.
Apathy. Disillusion.
Political apathy refers to someone's indifference to the voting process. But political alienation means someone who has become so detached from the political process that they feel that they can't affect it at all. And they might get the feeling deeply that their vote simply does not matter. These people want to vote, but they don't feel like any political party or politician has their best interest in mind. So why bother? And this problem persists, even if you reduce all voter suppression, even if you somehow fix the massive clusterfuck that is America's electoral system. Some people will still, at that point, feel like no political party can represent me, so what's the point anyway? and so the problem still persists. And it is important, not just to someone who supports democracy like some kind of liberal, but because ignoring it lays the foundations to something potentially worse. How many people do you think supported Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, not because they actually supported any specific policy decision that either of them had, but because they considered them to be a shock to the system? And speaking of the system, when people find themselves distrusting or even against the system, they will usually find themselves supporting people who want to destroy that system. And speaking of the system, you know, it's not a me and Mulder video unless I mention Germany for some reason. I'm not even German. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany had something called the Weimar Republic. And while I could literally go on for hours about this time period, let's stay focused on voter apathy and political alienation. The Republic was a bit of a weird conglomeration of many different political systems that had sprung up as a kind of emergency government after the complete collapse of the previous government, after the abdication of the Kaiser and the loss of a world war. And many people felt that this chaos was completely mismanaged. And it's easy to understand why too, because Germany was at the time pretty politically unstable. And while the Republic had elections, a lot of people felt that they didn't actually do anything. The political structures that were in place were weak, and the governments that kept forming rarely actually had any significant change on the lives of everyday working people. Over time, many people became dissatisfied with the system itself. This system was also a pejorative term used to refer to Weimar Germany entirely, usually by national conservatives who were against many of the values of the Weimar Republic. And I wonder where I've heard language like that before. I get that people want to compare these characters a lot, but it's not like Donald Trump is actually calling his political opponents system politicians or system press. The deep state and the left and the fake news media are going crazy. But let's view this from the perspective of a German citizen at the time. Like many people of the time, he found himself being incredibly disillusioned by the political systems that he had available to him, and even finding himself to kind of be alienated from fellow other conservatives. And so he did kind of find an ally among the bad people. And when the bad man was elected chancellor, he viewed that as a possibility of national resurgence. That's not to say that he agreed with the policies of the bad man, or that he necessarily supported the party, but he was tired of the system that had already existed, and he was hopeful for something to return Germany to its former glory. However, as time goes on, he finds himself being more and more at odds with the actual ramifications of the party. Eventually it goes so far that he opposes the regime he once supported and ends up in jail. His cellmate asked him why he used to support the Nazi party, and he responds with,
I found myself wondering about that too. I wonder about it as much as I regret it. Still, it is true that Hitler betrayed me. I had an audience with him as a representative of the Protestant Church shortly before he became Chancellor in 1932. Hitler promised me on his word of honor to protect the Church and to not issue any anti-church laws. He also agreed to allow pogroms against the Jews, assuring me as follows: there will be restrictions against the Jews, but there will be no ghettos, no pogroms in Germany. I really believed him. Given the widespread anti-Semitism in Germany at the time, the Jews should avoid aspiring to government positions or seats in the Reichstag. There were many Jews, especially amongst the Zionists, who took a similar stand. Hitler's assurance satisfied me at the time. On the other hand, I hated the growing aesthetic movement, which was fostered and promoted by the Social Democrats and the Communists. Their hostility towards the church made me pin my hopes on Hitler for a while. I'm paying for that mistake now, and not me alone, but thousands of other persons like me.
The man in the example is Martin Niemöller, whose post-war confessions sparked the poem of First They Came, as in, first they came for the communists. This poem is, for many people, viewed as a view on empathy, but I don't think it's just that. I think it's a study on empathy and apathy. There's no guarantee that even if he cared, he would have spoken out. And I ask myself again and again, what would have happened if in the year 1933 or 1934 there must have been a possibility 14,000 Protestant pastors in all Protestant communities in Germany had defended the truth until their deaths. If we had said back then, it is not right when Hermann Göring simply puts 100,000 communists in the concentration camps in order to let them die. I can imagine perhaps 30 or 40,000 Protestant Christians would have had their heads cut off, but I can also imagine that we would have rescued 30 to 40 million people, because that is what it is costing us now. The point is that political alienation and political apathy is viewed as kind of a mute problem for a lot of people. Many people seem to consider this group as just this passive voter bloc that doesn't do anything at all and doesn't actually have any effect on the politics of the country. But as we have seen in history, it has very significant potential to be exploited, which is dangerous. But while it is dangerous, it is also potentially useful, because these people can be radicalized into doing progressive actions as well. The enemy for a lot of people who are politically alienated isn't necessarily the values of any political party. It is the system in which those political parties exist. And it is the system itself that is causing the problems, not necessarily any policy issue. And because of this, it's a weirdly non-ideological voting bloc that can potentially be exploited and shifted to supporting policies that they don't actually support, as is the case with Martin Niemöller. This is why a lot of people also want to support a form of the status quo, because for them, the system is working fine, and they can only interpret dissent to that system as being dissent towards the policies. Which is why sometimes you will see a lot of people complaining about people not voting for their candidate, even though the other candidate is ostensibly worse than their own. The problem is that no matter the policies that are available to you, the policies that you actually hold might never be available, and therefore it doesn't actually matter who you vote for. And therefore, there is no lesser evil for some people, and the end result is those people will not vote for you or your candidate. So what do we do about that? Well, it kind of sucks that the only reasonable answer here is we have to do stuff. We have to organize, we have to unionize, we have to actually create new structures that people can instead find enthusiasm within. The counter to political alienation and apathy is to find a new outlet where that apathy can kind of go away. Political enthusiasm is the kind of antidote to political apathy. At least, I don't know, that makes sense. I'm not a political scientist, I'm an historian. The point is though that these systems that we want to create should also try to fundamentally change the systems that we exist within. A big thing is that we need to realize that the problem here lies with the idea of democracies as they exist today. The problem is the system, but it's not necessarily fundamentally ruined. Voter turnout can vary significantly between countries, depending on what kind of measures exist within those countries. And so we can find many different ways of doing things well and doing things poorly. And ideally, we would want things to go well. And the thing is, any politician that promises to do these things will have supporters. Supporters that will want to change or destroy the system. And that can be exploited for bad, but it can also be used for good. The important thing is that we, as people who are interested in politics, remain active and remain productive as best as we can. Obviously, things are a bit tough right now, but if everyone puts in the work, then it does work. And we should work as hard as possible to make sure that everyone can take part in the benefits of that work. And speaking of staying productive, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. Right now there's a lot of anxiety and worry in the world, and so I, having been stuck at home, have found it very difficult to remain productive. But thanks to Skillshare, I've been able to learn some tips and tricks to stay productive, even when I stay at home, and just better ways to organize my life. Right now, the first 1,000 people who click the link in the description will get Skillshare Premium for free for 2 months. And for everyone else, it's like less than $10 a month. And they can take courses such as Simple Productivity, which is the course that I studied. Taking some time to learn a new skill can just be relaxing or calming, which is very useful in these times, I feel. And with that said, I think I'm going to go for a walk. I hear that there's a room in a zone outside where any wish that I have will be fulfilled. So, okay, I'm gonna head out. Thank you for watching that video. I would like to give a special thanks to everyone who helped me kind of crowdsource all of those voices that I had for transitions. Thank you for that. I had so many more voices than I knew what to do with, so I hope that you could hear yourselves, because you're all in there. If you like this video, I would very much suggest that you subscribe to my channel, so that you can see more of them. And I would like to give a special thanks to everyone out there who has seen this video. But I'd also like to give a special thanks to each and every one of my patrons. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Aini Salminen, Alexandra DeWitt, Alicia Crawford, Amalia, Athiet, Austin K, Autumn, Catherine Stenson, Dana Ferguson, Emil Rutkowski, Emily Rains, Emma Knott Goldman, Fox Kant, Garrett Gutierrez, Jane Lusby, Janelle Torgesson, Jonathan Wardrell, Josie Volps, Jörgen Danielsen, Kitchens, LPQ Silver, Linus 2.0, Michelle, Morimer, Mountain Snow, MSG, Nork 426. I'm not super sure about pronunciation on that one. Patrick Slack, Phobos 2390, Riley Knox, Safi Huck, Scary Sun, Zitzeries, Thoros of Muir, Tiffany A, Uncle Cheese, Rosie, Vinder, Vivian Crow, and Wolfgang the Grand High Exalted Wizard!